Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us again this evening for another great conversation. We are joined tonight by a dear friend and colleague. I consider her a sister in many ways, Dr. Gayle Woloschak. Dr. Woloschak is a professor of radiation oncology and cell and molecular biology. Try saying that all at once. Here in Chicago at Northwestern University. She has a PhD in medical sciences from the University of Toledo and has also received a D.Min. doctorate in ministry from Pittsburgh Theological Seminary in Eastern Christian Studies. Gayle, I can't say Dr. Woloschak, although I know it's appropriate, but I can't call you Dr. Woloschak. Gayle.
My students,
all right, well, everyone, if your students call you Gayle, then I can call you Gayle. Gayle, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And like any professor, we could see books, we could see so much of your research behind you. So we're really grateful that you're going to be able to help impart some of what you've learned and studied over the years. So our topic, by the way, everyone, feel free to submit your questions through Facebook Live. I'll try to get to some of them as best as I can. And just as a reminder, we invite everyone and ask everyone to consider supporting, helping our parishes continue to support our people. So please consider making an online gift at chicago.goarch.org/donate. All proceeds will benefit our parishes and the good work that they're doing for our people. Gayle, so today we're going to talk about science and religion, two very important areas, two very important disciplines. So could you just start us off by kind of summarizing in your own words, what do you think are the two main, what's the purpose of each discipline? What is each trying to do? What is science trying to achieve? And what is theology? Let's look at theology in particular, and let's say Orthodox theology. So let's bring it back a little more narrow. Let's not talk about religion, but orthodoxy trying to achieve.
So I think orthodoxy is about having a right relationship with God. And so we develop that right relationship through prayer, through contemplation, through study. But it's not an intellectual pursuit as much as it is a pursuit of the heart. And, many of the saints said that the theologian is the one who prays, and the one who prays is the theologian. So if you talk to God, you know God in that special way that makes a theologian. Science, on the other hand, sort of intersects. Science is about understanding nature and describing what goes on in nature, and nature is a product of God. So therefore, we're looking at God indirectly by studying nature.
So we can discover God by studying nature. Is that what you're saying? We can discover our relationship or enhance our relationship or get closer to God through nature. Many of the desert fathers and mothers would actually talk about the importance of creation in those terms.
Yeah, and I was recently in the desert in Egypt, and I mean, in that natural environment, you feel God's presence because you're sort of alone there with God. It's amazing, actually.
Yeah, I mean, we finished our two conversations these past Sundays focused on two monastics in Egypt, St. John Climacus and St. Mary of Egypt, and both of Father John Chrysavis and Professor Torrance mentioned the importance of the physical space, the desert, in discovering God. So, Gayle, they're each trying to do something unique. What would you say is the relationship? Are they constantly at odds? I mean, we have some people who believe that science has nothing to do with religion and they should, or theology, and they should kind of stay that way. Others think that there's perfect harmony there and, actually mistake religion for science and science for religion. So what do you think? What's the actual relationship?
So
or are there multiple models?
Yeah, there are models that have been proposed, and there are like huge numbers. I'm not going to go through all 12 models that have been proposed. I'll talk about the three main ones. The first one has been the war model, that science and religion are at war and they're never going to meet. That model's not orthodox, but it's what a lot of our society around us believes. The second model is that it's called the two books model, and it says that there are two books. One is the book of nature, which is what the scientist pursues, and one is the book of the Bible, which the church pursues. And I think that dichotomy is not in keeping with orthodoxy. A lot of early Roman Catholic scholars accepted that. I think a more appropriate model is the one that was proposed by St. Maximus the Confessor, and he saw that it was a complex relationship where there's an interconnection, and that you can't just divide science and religion, but that they are united, and that we need to see them as one whole instead of as being at war. And he also saw that there should be consistencies between what we see in nature and what we believe about God.
So I remember when studying, there's a great book by Dunbar Oakes that talks about Byzantine medicine, actually. Most of us see medicine and we appreciate medicine and all that it has to offer, especially Western and even Eastern medicine. People are embracing a lot more non-traditional, at least for the Western person, methods of treating diseases. But I remember studying that, there's 2,000 years of church history. The experience of the church is not, stagnant. And it was interesting to see how there are different times where the church, more than other times, valued the scientist, the doctor, and other times was at odds with the doctor and medicine and the scientist. And most of the time it had nothing to do with, do we accept what the scientist is saying or what the findings of the research are suggesting, but it's more because of for theological purposes. So, for example, I remember there are canons even of the church that say, you're not allowed to go to a non-Christian doctor. And most of us, nowadays would laugh at something like that because there's so many doctors that are not Orthodox or Christian even, and we visit and we're healed by them, and we're thankful to God for them. But the research showed that the church took that stance not because it was against medicine or against that particular religion and that person per se, but because at the time people would oftentimes in a vulnerable state be open to various teachings, and so people talked religion all the time back then. It wasn't something that you didn't discuss. So people, the church said, don't visit a non-Christian doctor, not because they were bad or, only Christians knew how to do medicine. It was because at the time people were all vulnerable to these types of false teachings, and then heresy would be introduced to the church.
Right, but let me agree with you, but add in that at the time, ethics were almost determined by the doctor. So you could go to a non-Christian physician and they could suggest things that a Christian would consider non-ethical. Today's ethics were actually put in place by Christianity. Christianity was part of what pushed to have modern medical ethics be used. And so now when you go to a physician, you could be pretty sure that they're following ethical practices because these are ones that Christians approved of in the very beginning. Now, I'm not going to say all practices today we would consider ethical, but it is ethical that a physician must inform you of your choices, which was not the case before. So I think that was also part of what was driving that decision.
So can you tell us if there are any other points of tension? I mean, someone asked from our viewership, kind of how do we reconcile evolutionary biology and orthodoxy? I know that could be a whole conversation by itself. So, I mean, are there kind of hot button issues? Where are we actually kind of bumping heads or avoiding conversations even because the topics are too difficult to handle right now?
Right, and so definitely evolution is one of those hot button issues that sometimes the church actually doesn't have a problem with evolution, but there are many people that think that it does. But I don't want to get into that because I could talk on that for about 5 hours, and you're listening, you would all disappear on me. So I'm happy to talk about that some other time. But I'm happy to also provide articles because I've written many articles on this. But there are other articles, other issues that are extremely tense right now are issues within the medical realm, as you've suggested. So as medicine is looking into what do we consider to be appropriate practices, should we use stem cells? That becomes an area of tension because, and actually that's an amazing issue because the Christian faith actually pushed for scientists to consider not using stem cells from embryos and said that it would not be ethical for us. And you know what? Scientists actually developed approaches to use stem cells that did not require the use of embryos. They could genetically alter the stem cells. So that was one example where, we say, oh, the church never plays a role. The church actually played a role in that decision. But there are a lot of tensions over beginning of life issues. When does life begin? I think you would find the majority of the medical community would think one thing, but Orthodox would say it begins at conception. So that would be an issue of tension that we would see between what goes on in medicine now and what doesn't. I think some other areas of tension would be environment, where our church through our patriarch has been very pro-environment, and yet you would find others that would say that that's not true. So I think there are many of those kinds of issues. One thing that's important. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I think it's important, even though there are difficult topics. I think it's important that obviously the church stay engaged, right? I mean, this is our topic is why we should be engaged, why we should dialogue, really. And you mentioned the example of embryonic stem cell research and how, if the church wasn't engaged in this, if we weren't speaking and dialoguing with and explaining why it's important for us not to allow this to happen, scientists may have just said, this is the easy way of doing it. Let's just use embryonic stem cells. Let's not advance science to the point where we can use something else to advance our research. But you were going to say something, Gayle?
Well, the other thing I think we need to appreciate is that science does influence ethical decisions. I mean, the example I often use is if you think back to the HIV problem years ago, and now we are in coronavirus age, so we are remembering back to HIV. But in the first days when nobody knew what caused AIDS, there was discussion of let's quarantine all these people, let's put them on an island all by themselves so they can't contaminate anybody. But slowly, as we learn more about the science of how the virus is spread, that it's spread through saliva, that you can live in the same house as somebody with HIV, it now became unethical to suggest quarantining HIV. So a lot of what we learn in science does drive what we consider to be ethical or non-ethical decisions. And we're seeing that, I think, today with coronavirus as well.
And I think I've read one of your articles where you actually I think on HIV/AIDS, how the science helped advance ethics. And I think somewhere in that article, you talk about at the time the church was actually considering ways to protect its own people. The dialogue, again, fast forward 30, whatever it is, years, is a very similar dialogue where I think the church was discussing how do we give communion to people? Is it safe to give communion in the conventional way? So this often will come up when we don't know what's going on around us, and science, fortunately, through the research of the men and women, we learn more about these diseases, and we kind of then understand our role and what measures to take to protect ourselves. So coming in contact, touching somebody with HIV/AIDS is not going to give you AIDS, right? It's a very different disease than what we're dealing with at any other time. So one of my favorite shows, and this is now I'm getting more comfortable speaking to you as a friend and my older sister. One of my favorite shows of all time was a show on Fox. It was called Fringe. Did you ever watch that?
I know. I only saw it a couple times. I can't say I watched it a lot, but I liked it. It was good.
Well, it was an interesting show. I mean, it was about fringe science and alternate universes and science fiction, of course, right? But there. I mean, it seems like anytime you look out there, if you Google search science or religion, even there's fringe science. There's stuff that's totally out there in the realm of science fiction. Most of it is not real science. It's not really grounded on anything. It's all theoretical or just philosophical science. But there's also fringe I would say fringe, religion, fringe teachings. And it's not, and by that, I don't want to say, anything other than Orthodox is fringe religion. I mean, we may say we don't agree with the religious tradition, but to another people that may not be fringe teaching. But I mean, within a particular school or a particular religious tradition, there are fringe teachings. And I think we're seeing a lot of that nowadays. I don't know if you want to speak about that. What's out there, and what are scientists saying out there, or doctors? I mean, I've heard, from our circles here in the Metropolis, people suggesting now that science has, said that you can't get coronavirus through the air. I mean, and these are, professionals who are advancing these, I would say in a very cavalier way, these teachings that, could lead to a lot of problems.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can find anything on the web you want. Okay, if you want to believe that, the stock market didn't crash, you can find data on the web that will argue not. Okay, that's what the web is it's, a plethora of everything you could ever dream about. And so, of course, you're going to find some fringe theories on the web that are not accepted by the norm, just like you can find fringe orthodoxy on the web that your hierarch would never teach. I mean, so there's everything out there possible. So then what's our job? Our job is to try to be faithful to truth. And that truth is all truth. It's truth with a capital T, what we try to do through our faith, but it's also truth with a small t, which is what we do in science. And we need to some extent to be able to trust certain authorities that they're telling the truth. I mean, I studied 30 years to be a scientist, to be able to say the things that I do about science. It's really disheartening to have somebody who has never studied science but might be a great economist come to me and tell me what the scientific studies are showing. I've studied the scientific studies. I talk to scientists every day, particularly through this, coronavirus episode. I mean, I'm on the phone all day long over this. And then for somebody to tell me, oh, but Gayle, it's really not a big deal. You can go out among people. You don't need to wear masks. I mean, the number of things I've heard, it's just incredible. It has nothing to do with truth.
Well, I think, and now we are. I think most people, if not all people, most people at the very least understand that this is what we're dealing with is very real. That it's not this. It's not a virus that could be poo-pooed away like some people tried early on to say it's nothing. It's it's like the flu and you'll get over it. Just take some antibiotics and it goes away. I mean, we're seeing that it's very different. But I just some people, unfortunately, they especially within our community, they think they're theologians. So I'm getting all the time, why can't we do this and why can't we do that? We need the Eucharist and we need our churches open. By the way, that was Mom who just passed by. Yeah, she forgets that we're live, but that's okay. Why can't we have our churches open? What's the big deal? We're not people are going to the grocery stores. Like, why can't I go to church? Right. And I get it. It's tough because, people want to be in church and I want people in church and I want to be with people in church. But I think the understanding that what the authorities are saying about the case in hand, the small t, is important. So, I mean, could you tell us, a little bit about, what's happening and why are we taking such precautions? I mean, are we as a church overdoing it?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I was so pleased when you made the decision to say that, people will not attend liturgy on a Sunday because of this virus. We absolutely need to be staying indoors to save lives. If every person can spread the virus to at least 3 people, and in some cases as many as 57, think about how quick it would be if one of us were infected and we didn't know it, how much we could infect our entire community, and then they infect others, and then they infect others. So the only way to be able to solve this until we have either a cure, a vaccine, or a better way of testing is for us to stay isolated from each other. And I think what we need to do is to think about why the Lord brought this at this moment. I mean, it might be that we are meant to be home to slow our lives down, to think about things in a different way than we have. We need to take advantage of this time together, at this time alone, rather than to, say, oh, this is awful, this is terrible. And I've seen so many really wonderful things spring up from communities. I've seen people, my own parish, we have a virtual coffee hour on Sunday after streaming liturgy. There's outreach to people that need help, where people are dropping off food baskets and everything else to care for others. I don't think I would have seen this much caring in a regular day situation. So, it does bring out the best in humanity, and we need to allow that to happen, and we need to realize we're making a sacrifice. It's a hard sacrifice, but we're making it to keep others alive. And by doing that too, though, we also need to ask the question, what lesson should we be learning at this moment in time?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that I've said numerous times that the hope is that after this is done, that we become a better church, a better community, a more caring community that values the things that we see now more on an ongoing basis. When things go back to normal, we keep the good practices, the things that we want to continue, and lay aside some of the harmful things that we've been doing, at that fast-paced life. There are some people who will criticize the church and hierarchs of the church in particular. We have big targets on our backs. They say, you're making decisions based on science and not faith. And we got that question from someone. I don't know that I made a decision based only on science. I definitely took science into consideration, and I took the scientific information seriously. But I think to say that I put aside my faith or what the faith teaches, and I set it aside as being secondary or not important, I think is not accurate for any hierarch making these very difficult decisions.
And let me say that, our church teaches that we are both physical and spiritual. We don't say, oh, only the spiritual is good. We say the physical is good too. So we must act to help preserve life, because we're saying physical is good. If we didn't say that they're both good, it would be a different story. But we say they're both good. We must act upon that.
Yeah, and there are others that will suggest, like, oh, what's the big deal? People die all the time from the flu. And I mean, I can't believe people make those kinds of statements, like, so let's just be out there. It doesn't really matter. I mean, I think it's outrageous where our people will say things about the economy in this kind of like laying off of the stringent measures. Like, who cares? People die all the time. People will die. They'll commit suicide if they can't go out to work. I mean, it's like, take it easy. We want the economy to go back to normal. We want our daily lives, or Orthodox Christians to go back, our parish lives to go back to normal. But for us to say, what's the big deal? 80% will survive. Only 20% die, and let's just take the hit and let the rest of us appreciate our parishes. I mean, I had a doctor say to me, Your Eminence, the parishioners that are saying this, that are demanding communion or demanding something from the church at this time, are basically, transferring the risk from you guys to us, to the doctors and the nurses and all those on the front lines who are going to have to deal with all those people. They themselves will probably get sick, and many of them will get seriously sick. And I was stunned and taken aback and realized, I mean, we have a responsibility not only to our people, but to everyone in society. And it's very hard for us to accept that when things are normal. We kind of think about our families and my close friends, but now is the time to see how we're connected to each other. So I really, really appreciate the voice of science, but let's not think that we're not suffering. That we're not, making sacrifices, and our church teaches that we must make sacrifices.
Let me just add one other thing to that. I know we only have a minute left, but let me quickly say that the other thing is the church was the first one to build hospitals. So we do care about people's well-being and their physical well-being. We believe that the hands of the doctor are that the Lord is often guiding the Lord is guiding the hands of the physician. So how can we at the same time then put in practice things that are going to lead to many people dying? I mean, it just doesn't. It's not even consistent.
Well, yeah, and I have to say, there are people who will go and cherry pick and go and find, examples in the tradition. Saint Basil going in the leper colonies, and saints, all these fathers who were in giving communion and caring for the sick and so forth. And they think that just because they can go and find examples of that means that we can just be cavalier. I mean, I don't know. I mean, otherwise the church would have never built hospitals, as you said. They would never encourage people, Orthodox Christians, from being doctors. It's just, let's leave it up to God's hands. He'll take care of us. I think that there's a need for us to understand, especially the role of public health. Public health is a discipline that doesn't only look at one person. Of course, science and medicine values one person, but public health is trying to keep society at large. I mean, right now, this is a global pandemic, and the United States has a responsibility to Canada, to Mexico, to China, as all countries and people have a responsibility to one another. So, Gayle, what closing words can you give us as we approach Pascha?
I think this is going to be a very unusual Pascha for most of us. And I think it's going to be a hard thing for us to find the joy of the risen Lord in our hearts. But more this year than any other time, we have to do that. And so we must figure out how we're going to do that and work to do that.
And I think Pascha is a feast full of paradoxes, right? Life in the tomb, yep. Light in darkness, and we are going to be experiencing a communal experience, a communal event, a universal event in very different ways, and alone or isolated in our homes, just with one person. Perhaps some people are going to experience Pascha by themselves, physically by themselves. But I think it's important for us all to remember that we are all united, that we're separate, but we are indeed united, because at Pascha, the resurrection unites us all to God. So, Gayle, I really, really appreciated this. So you've got to come back on. Yeah, this is how we speak when we get on the phone. So you've got to come back on, and we're going to have a conversation about evolution, because okay. I think that deserves, greater, and maybe we can have a series on evolution. So it's not just a half hour, but you promised to help us do that.
I'll do it. I'd love to do it.
So. Okay. All right. So everyone, thank you again for joining us this evening. We thank Dr. Gayle Woloschak for joining us and for offering us some insight into the science theology relationship, letting us understand why science matters, especially now more than ever, given the issue with coronavirus. And again, I kindly encourage everyone to please help our parishes continue to help people by going online at chicago.goarch.org/donate and make an online gift. You can, any size, it doesn't matter, $10, $50, $1,000. Your help will allow our parishes to continue to help all of our people and beyond our community as well. So thank you, everyone. Have a Kali Anastasi. We'll actually see you this, what's today? Wednesday. We'll see you on Sunday, where we'll be talking about the crucifixion and the passion and crucifixion and resurrection of Christ with Dr. John Fotopoulos. So see you on Sunday. Take care, everyone.